The marble columns of the Hartwell estate caught the late September sun like ivory towers, casting long shadows across 400 acres of Virginia tobacco. 87 people lived and worked on this land in 1855, but only 15 were permitted inside the main house. Samuel was one of them. He stood motionless in the corner of the dining room, a crystal decanter balanced on a silver tray, while 5 white men argued over railroad contracts. Governor James Hartwell III sat at the head of the table, his face flushed from wine and anger. Thomas Whitmore, who owned the Richmond Gazette, leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man holding winning cards. The Kansas-Nebraska Act will determine whether we maintain our way of life or surrender to northern aggression, Hartwell said, his fork striking the china plate for emphasis. Every senator we elect must understand what's at stake. Samuel poured more wine. The men didn't look at him. They never did. He was 24 years old, property valued at $1,200 in the estate ledger, and as far as they were concerned, he possessed neither ears nor memory. Speaking of senators, Whitmore said, swirling his glass, I've been hearing interesting things about your arrangement with the Railroad Commission. The payments, James. People are starting to ask questions. The room went silent. Hartwell's hand froze halfway to his mouth. His eyes, already red-rimmed from drinking, fixed on Whitmore with sudden focus. I have no idea what you're talking about, Hartwell said carefully. Of course not. Whitmore smiled. Just thought you should know what people are whispering in Richmond, before it becomes more than whispers. Hartwell changed the subject, his voice too loud, too jovial. But Samuel had seen the panic flash across his face. He'd heard the words clearly: arrangement, payments, questions. He finished pouring wine and retreated to the corner, his heart beating faster than it should. 3 miles away, in the tobacco fields that stretched toward the tree line, Isaac hauled water buckets along the rows. The September heat pressed down like a physical weight. Overseer Clemens paced nearby, rifle resting in the crook of his arm, counting workers with the methodical attention of a man who took pride in his job. Isaac was identical to Samuel in every visible way. Same height, same brown eyes, same scar above the left eyebrow from when they'd fallen from a tree at age 7. But his hands were covered in cuts from tobacco stems, and his back bore the raised scars of a whipping he'd received 5 years ago for the crime of asking why. He set down the buckets and straightened slowly, calculating the distance between himself and Clemens, measuring the angle of the sun, noting which workers were flagging and which were maintaining pace. This was survival, constant assessment, perpetual awareness, never letting your mind drift even when your body screamed for rest. Across the field, near the property line where the dirt road separated Hartwell's land from the neighboring estate, he caught a glimpse of movement. Someone was bringing lunch baskets to the field workers, a house servant making the daily delivery. Even from 100 yards away, even though he hadn't spoken to him in 6 years, Isaac recognized his brother. Samuel set down the baskets and straightened. For one brief moment, their eyes met. Samuel's hands moved in the old signals they developed as children, before they were separated, index finger to chest, then pointing, then a clenched fist. Danger. Need to talk. Isaac touched his ear briefly, then his heart. I understand. Then Mrs. Preston's voice cut across the distance. Samuel. Stop dawdling and get back to the house. The governor needs his study prepared. Samuel picked up the empty baskets and walked away. Isaac returned to the water buckets. Clemens had noticed nothing. But something had shifted between them, a current of communication that transcended the 3 miles and the rigid caste system that kept them apart. The brothers had been born on this plantation 24 years ago, during a winter so cold that ice formed on the inside of the cabin windows. Their mother, whose name was Ruth though she was never called by it, had labored for 16 hours before delivering first Samuel, then Isaac 12 minutes later. The midwife had declared it a miracle that both survived. Their father was unknown, possibly one of 3 men, the overseer who'd been replaced in 1830, a traveling preacher who visited the estate that summer, or another enslaved man who'd been sold south before the twins could walk. Their mother never spoke of it, and they learned early not to ask questions that had no safe answers. They grew up inseparable, two halves of one person, developing a private language of gestures and glances. At age 8, their mother was sold to a plantation in Georgia. They remembered her hand stroking their hair the night before she left, her whispered words, "Take care of each other. You're all the family you'll ever have." At 12, during the annual inspection when Hartwell evaluated his property, everything changed. Mrs. Preston, the head housekeeper, had stopped in front of the twins. She'd examined them both, looking at their hands, their eyes, the way they stood. Then she'd pointed at Samuel. "This one," she'd said. "He has softer hands, quicker eyes. He'll train for housework." Isaac had watched his brother walk toward the main house, their connection stretching like a physical cord between them. That night, alone in the field quarters for the first time in his life, he'd felt like half of himself had been amputated. The separation was enforced absolutely. House servants slept near the kitchen, wore clean clothes, ate better food. Field workers lived in cramped quarters near the tobacco rows, woke at dawn, worked until dark. The two groups were forbidden to fraternize. Punishment for breaking this rule ranged from reassignment to whipping to being sold. But the twins had maintained their connection through glances across distances, through the brief moments when Samuel delivered lunch baskets, through hand signals that looked like ordinary gestures to anyone who didn't know their private language. Samuel had taught himself to read by studying newspapers discarded in Hartwell's study, memorizing the shapes of words by candlelight. Isaac had taught himself to identify patrol patterns by the sound of horses, to calculate time by the position of the sun, to become invisible through absolute stillness. They'd survived by becoming what the system demanded: Samuel the obedient, intelligent house servant, Isaac the silent, enduring field worker. But beneath those performances, they'd remained connected, two minds sharing the same goal: survival. That evening, after the dinner guests had departed and the dishes were washed, Hartwell summoned Samuel to his study. The room smelled of tobacco and whiskey. Oil lamps cast wavering shadows across walls lined with law books and family portraits. "Close the door," Hartwell said. Samuel obeyed, his stomach tightening. Hartwell was 52 years old, descended from a family that had owned this land for 3 generations. He'd served 2 terms as governor and was planning a run for the United States Senate in 1857. He was a man who believed deeply in order, hierarchy, and his own natural right to rule over others. He studied Samuel for a long moment, his eyes calculating. "Did you hear what Mr. Whitmore said tonight?" "During dinner." Samuel kept his face blank, his voice neutral. "No, sir. I don't listen to what gentlemen say. I just serve." "You were standing right there." "Yes, sir. But I was thinking about pouring the wine properly. I don't pay attention to the words." Hartwell leaned forward. "Samuel, I've watched you for 12 years. You're clever. Too clever. That makes you either very valuable or very dangerous." Samuel said nothing. Fear prickled along his spine. "A slave who listens," Hartwell continued, "is a slave who might repeat what he hears. And a slave who repeats what he hears might find himself sold to the sugar plantations in Louisiana. Do you understand what happens to slaves in Louisiana, Samuel?" "Yes, sir." "Tell me." "They work until they die, sir. Usually within 5 years." "Exactly." Hartwell poured himself more whiskey. "So I'll ask you again, and I want the truth. What did you hear Mr. Whitmore say?" Samuel met his eyes. "I heard him ask about wine, sir, and talk about the weather. That's all I remember." It was a calculated lie. Hartwell would know Samuel was intelligent enough to remember more. But by claiming ignorance of the specific dangerous words, arrangement, payments, questions, Samuel was signaling that he understood the boundary between acceptable knowledge and lethal knowledge. Hartwell stared at him for another long moment, then waved his hand dismissively. "Get out. And remember, a slave who knows too much doesn't live long enough to regret it." "Yes, sir." Samuel left the study, his legs weak, his hands shaking. He'd just learned that he was living on borrowed time. Whatever Hartwell was hiding, whatever arrangement Whitmore had referenced, it was dangerous enough that Hartwell would kill to protect it. He needed to talk to Isaac. He needed his brother's mind working alongside his own, the way they'd operated as children, thinking as one person. But they were separated by 3 miles, by constant surveillance, by a system designed specifically to prevent exactly this kind of communication. That night, lying on the thin mattress in the house servants' quarters, Samuel made a decision. Whatever risk was necessary, he would take it. Because if Hartwell suspected that Samuel had heard too much, Samuel would be sold or killed. The only path to survival was knowing more, enough to protect himself, or enough to destroy the man who threatened him. Mrs. Preston found Samuel in the hallway the next morning. She was 63 years old, enslaved for 40 years, and possessed a mind sharp as broken glass. She'd survived by being useful, by knowing everything that happened in the house, by never disrupting the order that kept her alive. "You're worried," she said quietly, folding linens. "I can see it in your face." "I'm fine." "The governor called you to his study last night. That never means anything good." She glanced around to ensure they were alone. "Whatever you did, whatever you heard, undo it. Make yourself harmless. Forgettable. Do you understand?" "I didn't do anything." "Then you heard something. Same danger." She touched his arm briefly, a rare gesture. "I've seen clever boys like you before. They all ended up sold or dead. Don't be clever, Samuel. Be invisible." But Samuel couldn't be invisible anymore. Because that afternoon, while preparing the governor's afternoon tea, he'd overheard Hartwell in conversation with his wife. "Whitmore knows something," Hartwell had said. "He's fishing, trying to make me react. If he had proof, he would have printed it already." "What does he think he knows?" Mrs. Hartwell's voice was cold, practical. "The Railroad Commission votes. The payments from Atlantic Railroad. If that comes out, then we lose everything. The Senate run, the estate, your reputation. Can you stop him?" "I'm working on it. But we need to be careful. Everyone is a potential witness. Even the servants." Samuel had frozen with the tea tray halfway to the door. He'd heard everything. Names, details, the nature of the crime. Hartwell had taken bribes to influence state railroad commission votes, accepting payments from Atlantic Railroad in exchange for favorable decisions. It was enough to destroy him. It was also enough to get Samuel killed. 2 nights later, at 2 in the morning, Samuel slipped out of the house servants' quarters. The moon was a thin crescent. He moved through the dark with the careful silence he'd learned over 12 years, across the yard, past the kitchen garden, along the dirt path that led toward the fields. He found Isaac behind the tobacco drying barn, waiting in the shadows. They hadn't stood face to face in 6 years. For a moment, they just looked at each other, seeing themselves reflected back. "You're taking a huge risk," Isaac whispered. "If Clemens catches you." "I know. But I had to talk to you." Samuel quickly explained what he'd overheard. The railroad bribes, Whitmore's suspicions, Hartwell's paranoia. "He knows I heard something. He's watching me. I think he's going to sell me." Isaac processed this silently. "So leave. Run. Get to the north." "I can't. They'd catch me before I made it 10 miles. And they'd punish everyone else to make an example." Samuel shook his head. "But I've been thinking. What if there was a way to use this? What if we gathered more information, enough to bury him?" "Why would we want that?" "Because Ephraim told me something," Isaac said slowly. "There's someone. a conductor on the Underground Railroad. She moves through Virginia, helping people escape. But she doesn't just want escapees, she wants evidence. Proof that these men are as corrupt as we know they are. Proof that makes Northern abolitionists angry enough to help. Samuel stared at his brother. You want to expose Hartwell? I want to destroy him. And I think you do too. Isaac's voice was hard. He's planning a Senate run. If he wins, his corruption goes national. How many more people suffer? How much more power does he gain? If we do this and we are caught. We are caught anyway. You said it yourself, he's already suspicious. We are living on borrowed time. Isaac leaned closer. But what if we could gather everything? Every secret, every bribe, every crime? What if we could document it and get it north? Then we'd have leverage. Maybe even freedom. Samuel's mind raced. The risk was enormous. But Isaac was right. They were already in danger. The question wasn't whether to take a risk, but which risk to take. Passive waiting for Hartwell's paranoia to seal their fate, or active resistance that might, just might, lead to something better. How? Samuel asked. You're in the fields. You can't access the house. I'm in the house, but I can't move freely. We need both, someone to hear the secrets and someone to pass them on. Isaac smiled, the expression identical to Samuel's own smile. We look exactly alike. What if we traded places? Samuel's first reaction was dismissal. They'd know immediately. Your hands, your back, the way you walk, everything's different. Then we learn. You teach me house manners. I'll teach you field survival. We practice until we can fool anyone. It's impossible. Is it? Isaac held up his hands. Your hands are soft because you work inside. But skin hardens. Cuts heal. In a month, I could make my hands look like yours. And you could put calluses on yours. My back isn't scarred. That, Isaac said quietly, can be fixed. Samuel understood what his brother was suggesting. You want me to cut my own back? To match your scars? I want us to become interchangeable. So we can be in two places at once. Isaac's voice carried absolute certainty. Think about it, Samuel. You hear the secrets but you're trapped. I can move, but I hear nothing. Together, we could be everywhere. We could gather evidence from the house and pass it to the conductor. We could destroy him. Samuel looked at his brother, his identical twin, his other self, the only family he had left. The plan was insane. It was also brilliant. If we do this, Samuel said slowly, we do it completely. No half measures. We gather everything, and we make sure it reaches the north. We don't just escape, we make him pay for what is done. Isaac nodded. Agreed. They shook hands, their grips identical. Then Isaac disappeared into the darkness, and Samuel crept back to the house. As he slipped into his quarters, he realized that everything had changed. They were no longer two separate slaves trying to survive. They were one weapon with two edges, preparing to strike. Tomorrow, they would begin practicing. They had months of work ahead, learning each other's roles, matching each other's scars, perfecting the deception. But for the first time since they were 12 years old, Samuel felt something close to hope. The twins were together again. And this time, they weren't going to be separated by anyone. The first swap lasted only 20 minutes, but it proved the impossible was possible. It happened 3 weeks after their midnight meeting, on a November evening when the house was chaotic with preparations for a dinner party. Samuel had spent those weeks teaching Isaac everything: how to pour wine without spilling, which guests required, which forms of address, the specific way Hartwell liked his study arranged, the 100 small behaviors that separated house servants from field workers. Isaac had taught Samuel the opposite: how to pace yourself in the field so you didn't collapse from heat, which overseers could be distracted and which ones watched everything, how to make yourself invisible by matching the rhythm of everyone around you, the art of enduring pain without showing it on your face. They'd also begun the painful work of making themselves physically identical. Samuel had used a broken piece of glass to cut careful lines across his own back, matching the scars Isaac had received from a whipping. The infection had nearly killed him, but Mrs. Preston had treated it without asking questions. Samuel's hands had developed calluses from practicing field work in secret during the early mornings. That November evening, while servants rushed between kitchen and dining room, Samuel slipped out the back door. Isaac was waiting in the shadows near the kitchen garden. They exchanged clothes quickly, Samuel putting on Isaac's torn field shirt and rough pants, Isaac putting on Samuel's clean house uniform. "Remember," Samuel whispered urgently, "Hartwell takes his brandy at 8. Mrs. Preston will ask you about tomorrow's menu. Just say you'll check with the cook. Don't elaborate. Don't offer information. Just serve and stay silent." Isaac nodded, his expression shifting into the neutral mask Samuel wore in the house. It was remarkable how much they looked alike when they assumed each other's demeanor. Then Isaac walked toward the house, and Samuel headed for the fields. For 20 minutes, Isaac stood in the dining room corner, holding a decanter, while 6 white men discussed politics. He poured brandy when indicated. He remained motionless. He was invisible, exactly as Samuel had taught him. Samuel, meanwhile, crouched in the dark field quarters, surrounded by exhausted workers, his heart pounding. He was terrified someone would speak to him, expecting responses Isaac would give, but Samuel didn't know. But the workers were too tired to talk. They barely glanced at him. 20 minutes later, they met behind the tobacco barn and swapped back. Both were shaking slightly, adrenaline and fear mixing with exhilaration. "It worked," Isaac said. "It almost worked," Samuel corrected. "Mrs. Preston asked me something about the guest list for next week. I didn't know the names. I had to pretend I was too exhausted to remember." "Did she believe you?" "I don't know." They didn't know that Mrs. Preston had indeed noticed something off about Samuel that evening. She'd watched him pour brandy with slightly too much concentration, as if performing an action he'd memorized rather than one he'd done 1,000 times. She'd seen him hesitate for half a second before moving toward the correct cabinet. But Mrs. Preston was 63 years old and had survived by knowing when to speak and when to stay silent. She said nothing. Not yet. Over the next 3 months, November 1855 through January 1856, the twins perfected their deception. They swapped 2 or 3 times a week, always during moments of chaos when surveillance was relaxed. Early mornings, late evenings, during storms, during parties. They developed a signaling system. A specific button left undone meant swap tonight at midnight. A handkerchief positioned in a certain way meant too dangerous, abort. They left coded messages in the tobacco barn, hidden inside hollowed-out fence posts, pressed between specific pages in the ledger books that Samuel maintained. Samuel began documenting everything he overheard in Hartwell's study. He stole moments alone with the governor's correspondence, memorizing contents of letters. He learned that the corruption went deeper than he'd first understood. Hartwell wasn't just taking railroad bribes, he was involved in a legal expansion of slave trading routes, working with partners in Charleston to bypass federal restrictions, planning to extend operations into Cuba. The evidence accumulated. Names of 3 state senators who'd been bribed, amounts of payments, dates of illegal slave shipments, details of future plans. Samuel wrote it all down in a journal he kept hidden in the tobacco barn, wrapped in oilcloth, buried beneath a marked floorboard. Isaac, during his turns as Samuel, had begun actively eavesdropping. While serving at dinner parties, he positioned himself near doorways where private conversations happened. He memorized names, repeated phrases, connections between people. He was learning to be a spy. During his turns as Isaac, Samuel was learning what his brother had endured for 12 years. The brutal physical labor, the constant surveillance, the small cruelties inflicted by overseers who used violence to maintain control. He'd collapsed from heat exhaustion his second day in the fields. Clemens had kicked him until he stood up. No rest until sundown, Clemens had said. That's the rule. Samuel had stood, his vision swimming, and kept working. That night, he understood his brother in a way he never had before. In March 1856, everything changed. Ephraim, the field worker who spoke in biblical language and whispered about mysterious conductors, approached Isaac after a particularly brutal day. "You're doing something different," Ephraim said quietly. "I don't know what, but you're changing. You and your brother." Isaac froze. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me, boy. I've been watching. You disappear sometimes. You come back different. And I've seen your brother near the fields when he shouldn't be." Ephraim's expression was unreadable. "Question is, are you trying to run? Because if you are, you'll get us all punished." Isaac made a calculation. He could deny everything, maintain the secret. Or he could trust this man who'd hinted for years that he had connections to something larger. "We are not running," Isaac said carefully. "We are gathering evidence. Information about Hartwell, about crimes he's committed. We are trying to get it north, to people who can use it." Ephraim was silent for a long moment. Then, "The woman I told you about. Ruth. She's real. And she's coming next week. She poses as a laundress, moves through Virginia gathering information and guiding people. If you have evidence worth passing along, I can arrange a meeting." "Why are you helping us?" "Because I've been documenting my own information for 3 years," Ephraim said, "about the slave trade routes through Virginia. But I need more than my word. I need proof from inside these houses. Your brother can get that." 1 week later, Samuel met Ruth at the property boundary, near the old stone wall that separated Hartwell's land from a neighboring estate. She was 40-something, a free black woman who'd purchased her freedom 15 years earlier. She traveled through Virginia under cover of taking laundry work, but her real purpose was intelligence gathering for the abolitionist movement. Samuel showed her his journal. Page after page of careful documentation, bribe amounts, dates, names of corrupt officials, details of illegal shipments, evidence of Hartwell's planned Senate campaign funded by stolen money. Ruth read in silence. When she finished, she looked at Samuel with something close to awe. "This is bigger than one plantation," she said. "This could expose a network. Hartwell, his partners in Charleston, 3 state senators, connections to dozens of other men. If this gets published in the North, what happens then? Political earthquake. These men lose everything. And it proves what we've been saying all along. The system isn't just brutal, it's corrupt, built on theft and lies." She carefully wrapped the journal back in oilcloth. "But I need more. Specific documents. Financial records. Something we can verify independently. Hartwell keeps a ledger in his study. It has everything. Can you get it?" Samuel hesitated. Stealing it would alert him immediately. "But I could copy the relevant pages. It'll take time." "How much time?" 2 months. Maybe 3. Ruth nodded slowly. "We need to be strategic about timing. If we release this information right now, it disappears in the noise. But if we wait until Hartwell officially announces his Senate campaign, next spring, probably, then it destroys him at the moment of his greatest visibility." Samuel understood the calculation, but he also understood the cost. That's almost a year of continued risk. Every day we do this, we might get caught. "I know. That's your choice to make, not mine." Ruth looked at him directly. "But understand this. If you do get caught, I can't protect you. The information will still go north, but you'll likely be dead." Samuel thought of his brother, of their midnight conversations, of the year they'd spent becoming one weapon with two edges. We'll take the risk. But we need an exit plan. When you publish this, Hartwell will know it came from inside his house. We need a way out. I can arrange that. When the time comes, I'll get you north. Both of you. She paused. You said we. There are two of you. Samuel smiled. That's our secret. But secrets and systems built on surveillance never remain hidden forever. Mrs. Preston had been watching for months. She'd noticed the small discrepancies, Samuel performing tasks with slightly different efficiency depending on the day, his posture changing subtly, his responses to familiar questions varying in ways they shouldn't. She'd also noticed that Samuel seemed to know things about fieldwork he shouldn't know, how to judge tobacco quality by touch, which workers were injured, details about field conditions that house servants never learned. One evening in April, she found Isaac, currently serving as Samuel, in the linen closet. She closed the door behind her. You're not him, she said quietly. Isaac's mind raced through possible responses. Denial was useless. Her expression made clear she was certain. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. You're his brother. I don't know how you're doing this, but you're switching places. You're both Samuel and you're both the field worker whose name I don't know. She stuttered him. The question is why. Isaac made a decision. Mrs. Preston could destroy them with one word to Hartwell. But she could also be an ally. And they needed allies. His name is Isaac. We are twins. And we are documenting everything Hartwell does. Every bribe, every crime, every corrupt deal. We are going to destroy him. Mrs. Preston's face showed no reaction. That's suicide. Maybe. But he's going to sell Samuel anyway. He suspects Samuel heard something. We are already dead unless we act. So you decided to spy on him? To what end? To get the evidence north. To expose him. To ruin him so completely that he can't hurt anyone else. Isaac's voice was hard. You've served this family for 40 years. You know what they are. Don't tell me you haven't wanted them destroyed. Mrs. Preston was silent for a long moment. Then she said, I've buried 3 children this family sold away from their mothers. I've scrubbed blood off floors after punishments. I've watched women dragged to Hartwell's room and tried to pretend I didn't hear them crying. Of course I want them destroyed. Then help us. If I'm caught. You won't be. We'll protect you. But we need someone in the house who knows the truth. Someone who can cover for inconsistencies. Mrs. Preston stuttered him, seeing not Samuel but someone else, someone harder, more desperate. How long have you been doing this? 5 months. And no one's noticed except me. We are very careful. She made her decision. I'll keep your secret. I'll help cover for you. But understand this. If it looks like you're going to be discovered, I won't protect you. I'm too old to die for someone else's rebellion. That's fair. She opened the door, then paused. One question. What makes you think anything will change when you expose him? White men protect white men. You know that. Maybe, Isaac said. But we are going to try anyway. Because doing nothing guarantees we stay slaves forever. At least this way, we have a chance. Mrs. Preston nodded slowly. Your brother, Samuel, he's stronger than he looks. But you're the dangerous one, aren't you? You're the one who'll burn everything down. Isaac didn't answer. He didn't need to. May 1856 brought new dangers. Hartwell's paranoia had been growing steadily. After Thomas Whitmore published a carefully worded article in the Richmond Gazette questioning certain irregularities in state contracting processes, Hartwell became convinced he was surrounded by informants. He fired 2 house servants without explanation. He brought in a new overseer, a man named Davidson, whose sole job was to watch the other overseers and report any suspicious behavior. He ordered random inspections of sleeping quarters, looking for anything hidden, any evidence of literacy, any signs of organization among the enslaved population. One night, Clemens found a hidden oilcloth package in the tobacco barn. He'd been doing a surprise inspection, checking for stolen tools or hidden supplies. The oilcloth was wrapped around something that felt like papers. Samuel, who'd been warned of the inspection by Ephraim, had moved the journal 2 hours earlier. The oilcloth Clemens found contained blank pages, a decoy Samuel had prepared months ago for exactly this scenario. But the discovery sent Hartwell into a rage. He ordered every enslaved person on the plantation questioned. Where had the oilcloth come from? What had been wrapped in it? Who was hiding things? No one knew anything, because there was nothing to know. But Hartwell didn't believe in coincidence. He was convinced the oilcloth meant someone was documenting information, preparing to run, or planning resistance. He ordered Clemens to increase surveillance. Field workers were no longer allowed to move between quarters without permission. House servants were forbidden to speak to anyone outside the main house. The system of separation that had always existed became absolute. This made swapping nearly impossible. For 3 weeks, Samuel and Isaac maintained their normal roles, unable to trade places, unable to communicate except through distant glances. The journal stayed hidden in its new location, a hollowed-out fence post near the property line. The evidence stopped accumulating, but Hartwell's paranoia continued growing. He started drinking more heavily. He saw betrayal everywhere. One evening, he beat a house servant unconscious for the crime of moving too slowly. Mrs. Hartwell began sleeping in a separate room. The plantation existed in a state of suspended terror. Everyone waited for something to break. It broke in late July. Hartwell called Samuel to his study at midnight. Samuel entered to find the governor sitting in darkness, a bottle of whiskey half empty on the desk. "Sit down," Hartwell said. Samuel sat, his heart pounding. "I've been thinking about you, Samuel. About how intelligent you are. About how much you hear." Hartwell's voice was slurred. "You've been in my study hundreds of times. You've heard me discuss business, politics, private matters. You've seen my correspondence. You know things." "Sir, I don't." "Don't lie to me." Hartwell slammed his hand on the desk. "I know you hear everything. I know you understand more than you pretend. The question is, what have you done with that knowledge?" Samuel kept his voice steady. "Nothing, sir. I serve you. That's all I do. Thomas Whitmore is publishing articles about Railroad Commission corruption. Someone is feeding him information. Someone close to me." Hartwell leaned forward. "Is it you?" "No, sir." "Prove it." "How can I prove I haven't done something?" Hartwell stared at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm going to test your loyalty. Tomorrow, I'm selling 3 field workers. You're going to choose which ones. If you refuse, I'll assume you're sympathizing with them, which means you're a risk. If you choose, you prove you serve me above everything else." It was a trap designed to break him psychologically, force him to participate directly in the system he was trying to expose, or reveal his resistance and face immediate punishment. Samuel felt Isaac's presence somehow, even though his brother was miles away in the field quarters. He thought about their plan, about the evidence they'd gathered, about how close they were to having everything they needed. "I'll choose," Samuel said quietly. Hartwell smiled. "Good. Tomorrow at dawn. 3 names. And Samuel, choose wisely. I'll be watching to see if you try to protect anyone. If you do, I'll know you've been organizing. Understood?" "Yes, sir." Samuel left the study, his hand shaking. He had until dawn to decide, betray 3 people to maintain his cover, or refuse and risk exposure. He needed his brother. He needed Isaac's mind working alongside his own. But communication was impossible under the current surveillance. Or was it? That night, Samuel broke the rules they'd established. He snuck out of the house at 2 a.m. and ran toward the field quarters, abandoning caution. He needed Isaac. They'd spent their entire lives being two parts of one person. He couldn't make this decision alone. He found Isaac behind the tobacco barn, as if his brother had known he would come. "They're watching everything," Isaac said before Samuel could speak. "Clemens is doing random checks. You shouldn't be here." "I don't care." Samuel quickly explained Hartwell's test. Isaac listened in silence. Then, "Choose me." "What?" "Choose me as one of the three. That removes me from the plantation before things get worse. I can get north, connect with Ruth's network. You stay here, finish gathering evidence." "No," Samuel said immediately. "We do this together or not at all. We don't have that luxury anymore." Isaac gripped his brother's shoulders. "Listen to me. Hartwell is getting too suspicious. The window for gathering evidence is closing. But if you choose me for selling, if you make that sacrifice, he'll trust you completely. He'll lower his guard. You'll have access to everything." "I can't choose you." "You have to. It's the only way." Isaac's eyes were intense. "We knew this might happen. We knew there would be costs. I can survive being sold. I've survived everything else." Samuel felt something breaking inside him. They'd been together for a year, operating as one person, closer than they'd been since childhood. The thought of separation was unbearable. "There has to be another way." "There isn't. And you know it." Isaac released his shoulders. "Choose me. Tell Hartwell I've been troublesome, that I talk too much, that you've noticed me watching the house. Make it believable. He'll sell me, and I'll find my way north. You finish the mission." "What if I never see you again?" Isaac smiled, and it was the saddest expression Samuel had ever seen on his own face. "Then you remember that we did this together. That we were one person in two bodies, and we fought back the only way we could." They stood in silence for a moment, twins separated at 12, reunited for 1 year, now facing separation again. But this time, it was their choice. Their sacrifice. Their rebellion. "Don't get yourself killed," Samuel said finally. "Same to you." They embraced once, briefly. Then Isaac disappeared into the darkness, and Samuel ran back toward the house. At dawn, Samuel gave Hartwell 3 names. Isaac was one of them. Governor Hartwell smiled, satisfied that his test had proven Samuel's loyalty. He didn't know that he'd just made the most catastrophic mistake of his life, because now he'd given Samuel a reason to destroy him completely. Isaac was sold on August 1st, 1856, along with 2 other field workers Hartwell deemed expendable. Samuel watched from the house window as his brother was loaded onto a wagon, hands bound, heading toward Richmond's auction blocks. Isaac didn't look back. They'd agreed on this. Any sign of connection between them would raise suspicion. But inside, Samuel felt a piece of himself being torn away. Hartwell clapped Samuel on the shoulder that evening. "You made the right choice. That one was trouble. I could see it in his eyes. You proved your loyalty." "Thank you, sir," Samuel said, his voice empty. What Hartwell didn't know was that Isaac's sale had been coordinated with Ruth. She'd arranged for an abolitionist sympathizer in Richmond, a merchant named Hayes who secretly financed Underground Railroad operations, to purchase Isaac at auction. It was extraordinarily risky and expensive, but Ruth had convinced Hayes the investment was worthwhile. "These twins are gathering evidence that could expose a network of corrupt officials," she told him. "If we can protect Isaac, get him north, he can testify about everything they've documented. He's worth more than a dozen escapees." Hayes had agreed. 3 days after the auction, Isaac was aboard a ship heading to Philadelphia, hidden in a cargo container marked agricultural equipment. He carried copies of the journal pages they documented, memorized names and dates, and a promise that he'd testify if Samuel succeeded in getting the full evidence north. But Samuel didn't know if Isaac had made it safely. Communication was impossible. He could only hope and continue the mission they'd started together. With Isaac gone and Hartwell's suspicions temporarily satisfied, Samuel had freedom to operate that he hadn't possessed in months. The paranoid surveillance eased. Hartwell began drinking more heavily, consumed by his Senate campaign plans and the stress of keeping his corruption hidden. Samuel returned to his methodical documentation. He copied pages from Hartwell's ledger, working in the study during the early morning hours when the governor was passed out from whiskey. He memorized correspondence, noting names, dates, and payment amounts. He listened at doorways during private meetings. The evidence accumulated, proof of bribes to Virginia State Senators Clayton, Harrison, and Marks. Documents showing Hartwell's partnership with Charleston slave traders, planning illegal expansion into Cuban markets. Letters discussing shipments and arrangements with specific ship names and departure dates. Financial records showing $12,000 paid by Atlantic Railroad in exchange for favorable commission votes. By September, Samuel had enough evidence to destroy not just Hartwell, but a network of interconnected corruption spanning Virginia, South Carolina, and potentially into federal government. But he also noticed something else. Thomas Whitmore was increasing pressure on Hartwell. The Richmond Gazette published a series of articles, always carefully worded to avoid libel, questioning railroad commission decisions, noting curious patterns in state contracts, highlighting unexplained wealth accumulations. One evening in late September, Whitmore visited the estate for a private meeting. Samuel served brandy, invisible as always. "This needs to end, James," Whitmore said. "Drop out of the Senate race. Announce you're stepping back for health reasons. I'll stop publishing articles." Hartwell's face was red. "You're trying to blackmail me." "I'm trying to prevent a scandal that destroys us both. Because if this goes public, James, they'll investigate me too. My newspaper accepted your advertisements, your financial support. We are connected." Whitmore leaned forward. "Drop out. Live quietly. Keep your estate. That's the deal. And if I refuse, then I publish everything I know. And I know more than you think." Hartwell stood up, visibly shaking with rage. "Get out of my house." Whitmore left. Hartwell threw his brandy glass against the wall, where it shattered. Then he turned to Samuel. "Did you hear that?" "No, sir," Samuel lied. "Good. Because Thomas Whitmore is a dead man. And anyone who helps him is dead too." Samuel cleaned up the broken glass, his mind racing. Hartwell wasn't going to back down. He was going to fight, which meant he'd become even more paranoid, more dangerous. The window for gathering evidence was closing. He needed to accelerate the timeline. That night, Samuel met Ruth at the property boundary. It was the first time he'd risked contact since Isaac's departure. "Do you have everything?" she asked. "Almost. I need 2 more documents, financial records from the Cuba operation and a letter Hartwell received from Senator Clayton. They're in his private safe. I haven't been able to access it yet." "How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe less." Samuel hesitated. "Have you heard from Isaac?" Ruth smiled. "He made it to Philadelphia. He's safe. He's already giving speeches to abolitionist societies about conditions in Virginia. He's using the name Samuel Freeman, taking your first name, claiming his freedom. People are listening." Samuel felt relief flood through him. His brother was alive and free. "When can we publish?" he asked. "As soon as you get those final documents. Hartwell announces his Senate campaign in November. We publish in October, Right before the announcement. Maximum impact. That's 6 weeks. Can you last that long? Samuel thought about the risk, the surveillance, the possibility of discovery. Then he thought about his brother giving speeches in the North, about the network of corruption they were about to expose, about the system they were fighting. I can last. Good. Because Frederick Douglass wants to meet Isaac. He's planning to publish a special edition of his newspaper featuring the evidence you've gathered. This is bigger than one governor, Samuel. This is going to shake the entire system. After Ruth left, Samuel returned to the house. He passed Mrs. Preston in the hallway. You're taking too many risks, she whispered. I've seen you sneaking out. Others will notice. 6 more weeks. That's all I need. 6 weeks is a lifetime when you're living on borrowed time. She gripped his arm briefly. Whatever you're planning, do it faster. But fast wasn't always possible. The safe Hartwell kept in his bedroom contained the documents Samuel needed, but accessing it required getting the governor out of his room long enough to work on the lock. Samuel had been teaching himself lockpicking using stolen tools, practicing on simpler locks throughout the house. But he'd never attempted the bedroom safe. The opportunity came 3 weeks later, in mid-October. Mrs. Hartwell hosted an evening party that required Hartwell's attendance downstairs for at least 2 hours. Samuel volunteered to prepare the bedroom for the governor's eventual return, which gave him legitimate access. He worked on the safe with hands that shook from adrenaline. The lock was complex, but he'd memorized the mechanism. After 40 minutes, it clicked open. Inside, ledgers, correspondence, and, crucially, a detailed contract between Hartwell and a Cuban plantation owner, planning illegal slave trading expansion, and a letter from Senator Clayton explicitly acknowledging bribes and outlining future arrangements. Samuel copied both documents quickly, his handwriting cramped and hurried. He returned the originals to the safe, locked it, and left the room with the copies hidden in his shirt. He'd done it. He had everything. That night, he met Ruth and handed over the final evidence. She reviewed the documents, her expression growing more serious. This is it, she said. This destroys them all. Hartwell, the senators, the Charleston traders, everyone. When do you publish? October 28th. 3 days before Hartwell's announcement. Frederick Douglass is coordinating with 5 other northern newspapers for simultaneous publication. They're calling it the Virginia exposure. What happens to me? The day after publication, I'll have people waiting at the property boundary. You run. We get you north to join your brother. It'll be dangerous. Hartwell will know it was you, but if you can make it off the property, we can protect you. Samuel nodded. Less than 2 weeks. Then freedom or death. But systems built on surveillance don't sleep, and paranoia has a logic of its own. October 20th. Overseer Clemens reported to Hartwell that he'd seen someone moving near the property boundary at night. Multiple times. Always around midnight. Hartwell ordered increased patrols. Dogs were brought in to track movement. Every enslaved person's sleeping area was inspected at random times. October 23rd. Mrs. Hartwell mentioned to her husband that Samuel had been acting strangely, more nervous, more distracted. Hartwell began watching him more closely. October 25th. A field worker mentioned to Davidson, the surveillance overseer, that he'd seen Samuel near the tobacco barn late at night, which made no sense. House servants had no business in field areas after dark. The reports accumulated. Hartwell's suspicions crystallized. On October 26th, he called Samuel to his study. I've been hearing things, Hartwell said quietly. About you. About nighttime movements. About strange behavior. Sir, Don't speak. Just listen. Hartwell's eyes were cold and sober. I trusted you. I thought you were loyal. But loyalty from a slave is always conditional, isn't it? Always waiting for the moment to betray. I haven't betrayed you. Then explain why you've been seen near the property boundary at midnight. Multiple times. Who are you meeting? Samuel's mind raced through possible explanations. None of them were believable. I couldn't sleep. I was walking. Slaves don't walk for pleasure, Samuel. They have a reason. What's yours? Before Samuel could answer, there was a knock on the study door. Clemens entered, holding something wrapped in oilcloth. Samuel's heart stopped. Found this buried near the fence post by the property line, Clemens said. Hidden under rocks. Looks like papers. He unwrapped the oilcloth. Inside were pages of Samuel's handwriting. Older documentation from months ago that Samuel had forgotten was hidden there. Names, dates, evidence of corruption. Hartwell read in silence. His face went white, then red, then white again. You documented everything, he whispered. You've been spying. For how long? Samuel said nothing. There was nothing to say. Hartwell stood up slowly. Lock him in the basement. I need to think about this. Clemens grabbed Samuel's arm. As he was dragged from the study, Samuel caught a glimpse of Mrs. Preston in the hallway. Her expression was devastated. The mission was over. He'd failed. Or had he? Because October 28th was 2 days away. The evidence was already north, already in Frederick Douglass's hands, already being prepared for publication. Even if Samuel died, the mission would succeed. He just wouldn't live to see it. As the basement door locked behind him, Samuel thought of his brother. Somewhere in Philadelphia, Isaac was free, giving speeches, testifying about the system they'd fought. They'd been separated again, but this time they'd accomplished something. They'd wounded the system that owned them. Maybe that was enough. In the darkness of the basement, Samuel waited. Above him, Governor Hartwell paced in his study, trying to understand how his trusted servant had betrayed him, how the information had been gathered, whether it had been shared with anyone. The answer was yes. But by the time Hartwell realized it, the damage would be complete. October 28th was coming. And with it, destruction. Samuel spent 2 days in the basement without food or water. On the evening of October 27th, 1 day before the scheduled publication, Hartwell had him brought to the study. 3 men were waiting: Hartwell, Overseer Clemens, and Thomas Whitmore, who sat in the corner with the expression of someone watching a disaster unfold. Hartwell had aged 10 years in 2 days. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands shaking. The evidence Samuel had documented was spread across the desk: pages of careful notes, copied letters, financial records. How long? Hartwell asked. A year, Samuel said. No point in lying now. A year. Hartwell laughed, the sound brittle. You've been documenting everything for a year. Every meeting, every conversation, every private moment. And I never noticed. You noticed. You just didn't believe a slave could be that intelligent. Hartwell's face flushed with rage. Who have you told? Who has this information? Everyone, Samuel lied. Every abolitionist newspaper from here to Boston. It's already published. You're finished. Hartwell struck him across the face. Samuel tasted blood but stayed standing. I don't believe you. If it was published, I would have heard. Someone would have told me. Hartwell leaned close. I'm going to ask you one more time. Who did you give this information to? Samuel smiled through the blood. Someone you'll never find. Hartwell nodded to Clemens. Make him talk. Clemens removed his belt. Samuel prepared himself for the pain he'd watched his brother endure 5 years ago. The first strike across his back felt like fire. The second broke skin. By the 5th, Samuel's vision was swimming. But he said nothing. Because if he gave up Ruth's name, if he revealed the Underground Railroad connections, he'd destroy more than just himself. And the mission, Their mission, his and Isaac's, was bigger than one person's survival. "Stop," Whitmore said from the corner. "This is insanity, James. You're torturing him for information he's probably already sent. You need to prepare for the damage, not waste time on revenge." "Shut up," Hartwell snarled. "This slave destroyed me. I want to know how deep it goes." "It goes everywhere," Samuel gasped. "Every crime. Every bribe. Every corrupt senator you've purchased. It's all documented." "Impossible." "How could you know about the senators? How could you know about Cuba?" "Because I listened. Because you discussed it all in front of me, thinking I was furniture. Thinking I couldn't understand." Samuel straightened despite the pain. "You made yourself vulnerable by believing we are stupid. That was your mistake." Hartwell raised his pistol and pointed it at Samuel's head. "Give me one reason not to kill you right now." "Because," a voice said from the doorway, "there are two of us." Everyone turned. Standing in the study entrance was Isaac. The moment of confusion was absolute. Hartwell looked from Isaac in the doorway to Samuel in front of him. The pistol wavered. "How did you? I sold you. You're in Richmond." "No," Isaac said calmly, walking into the room. "I'm in Philadelphia. And also, I'm here. We are twins, Governor. Identical twins. And we've been trading places for a year." Hartwell's mind visibly struggled with the information. He looked back at Samuel. "That's impossible. I would have noticed." "You didn't," Samuel said. "Because you weren't looking. We are invisible to you." Isaac moved closer, and the similarity was striking. Same height, same scars, same way of standing. Clemens took a step back, his expression showing fear for the first time. "This is some trick," Hartwell said. But his voice was uncertain. "Is it?" Isaac and Samuel spoke simultaneously. "Or are we the same person? How do you tell us apart, Governor? Can you prove we are different?" They'd planned this moment months ago, prepared for the possibility that they'd need to create doubt, confusion, psychological warfare. Now, reunited in the room where Hartwell thought he had Samuel trapped, they executed the strategy perfectly. Isaac had returned to Virginia against Ruth's advice, unable to let his brother face this alone. He'd arrived at the estate an hour ago, hidden by darkness and chaos, and made his way to the house guided by Mrs. Preston's whispered directions. Now, both twins stood before Hartwell, mirror images, speaking in unison, finishing each other's sentences. "We documented everything," Samuel said. "Every bribe you took," Isaac continued. "Every senator you corrupted. Every illegal slave shipment. Every piece of evidence is in Frederick Douglass's hands. Publishing tomorrow morning. In 5 newspapers simultaneously. The Virginia exposure. You're finished." Hartwell's pistol moved between them, unable to fix on a target. "Which one of you heard the conversation about the railroad bribes? Which one copied my ledgers?" "Both of us," they said together. "Or maybe neither," Samuel added. "Maybe we are the same consciousness in 2 bodies," Isaac said. "Can you prove we are not?" They were deliberately driving him mad, creating the impression of impossibility, of supernatural connection. It was psychological warfare designed to break him. "This is a trick," Hartwell repeated, but his voice was desperate now. Thomas Whitmore stood up from his chair. "James, it doesn't matter if they're twins or demons. What matters is that they have evidence and it's going public. You need to." "No one is going public." Hartwell shouted. "I'll kill them both. I'll bury this. I'll—" The door opened again. Mrs. Hartwell entered, followed by Mrs. Preston and 3 other house servants. "What is happening?" Mrs. Hartwell demanded. "There's blood on the floor, there are 2 identical slaves, and you're waving a pistol around like a madman." They've been spying, Hartwell said. For a year. Documenting everything. They're twins. They've been trading places and I never knew. Mrs. Hartwell looked at the twins, then at her husband. So they're intelligent. More intelligent than we gave them credit for. Does that surprise you? They betrayed me. No, James. You betrayed yourself. By being corrupt. By taking bribes. By being so arrogant you discussed crimes in front of servants. She spoke with cold precision. This is your fault. I won't let them destroy me. Hartwell raised the pistol again. Stop. Mrs. Preston stepped forward. They already sent everything north. I helped them. 3 weeks ago, I gave copies to a conductor on the Underground Railroad. It's already published. Killing them won't change anything. She was lying. Publication was tomorrow, but the lie was strategic. If Hartwell believed it was already public, he might not kill them. Hartwell turned to Mrs. Preston, betrayal clear on his face. You. I've served this family 40 years. I've watched you sell children, beat innocents, corrupt yourself with greed. I'm glad they exposed you. Hartwell's hand with the pistol dropped to his side. The fight went out of him. He looked around the room at people he'd controlled for years, seeing clearly for the first time that control was an illusion. Everyone knows, he whispered. All the servants. They all knew. They've been watching me, judging me, planning against me. Not everyone, Isaac said. Just us. And the people we trusted. Hartwell's paranoia, always simmering, erupted completely. No. It's all of them. Every slave on this plantation. They're all connected. They've all been watching. I'm surrounded by enemies. He turned to Clemens. Question them all. Find out who else knew. Find out who. James, stop. Whitmore stood up. Listen to me. It's over. The evidence exists. It's going public. Your Senate career is finished. Your reputation is destroyed. The only question now is damage control. I won't accept this. You don't have a choice. Whitmore gestured to the twins. They won. Accept it and figure out how to survive. But Hartwell was beyond reason. He pointed the pistol at Samuel. You started this. You heard the conversation with Whitmore. If I kill you, maybe I can. Isaac moved. He threw himself between his brother and the pistol just as Hartwell fired. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Isaac staggered, blood spreading across his chest. Samuel caught him as he fell. No. No, Isaac, stay with me.
I'm fine, Isaac gasped.
I'm fine, it's. But he wasn't fine. The wound was high in the chest, bleeding heavily. Samuel pressed his hands against it, trying to stop the flow. Hartwell stared at the pistol in his hand, at the blood, at the chaos he'd created. His face went pale. Mrs. Hartwell moved immediately, taking control. Clemens, fetch the doctor. Mrs. Preston, get bandages. James, put the gun down before you hurt anyone else. I didn't mean to, I was just trying to. You shot an unarmed slave in your own study, Mrs. Hartwell said coldly. Whether you meant to or not is irrelevant. The doctor needs to be sworn to silence, and we need to control this situation before it gets worse. She looked at Samuel, still holding his brother. Will he survive? I don't know, Samuel said, his voice breaking. Then pray he does. Because if he dies, James, you're not just corrupt, you're a murderer. The doctor arrived within the hour. He examined Isaac, extracted the bullet, and declared the wound survivable if infection didn't set in. Isaac was moved to the basement, bandaged and semi-conscious. Samuel refused to leave his side. Mrs. Hartwell, displaying a pragmatism that surprised everyone, allowed it. Let him stay, she told Clemens. They are twins. Separating them now would be cruel. Hartwell remained in his study, drinking whiskey, muttering about enemies and betrayal. His grip on reality had loosened. He kept asking servants, "Which one are you? How many of you are there?" The paranoia had consumed him completely. October 28th dawned. The publications hit the streets of Richmond, Philadelphia, New York, and Boston simultaneously. The Virginia exposure detailed every crime, every bribe, every corrupt arrangement Governor James Hartwell had made. It named names, Senators Clayton, Harrison, and Marks. It revealed illegal slave trading routes. It exposed the Cuba expansion plan. The political earthquake began immediately. By noon, messengers arrived at the estate with news. Senator Clayton had resigned. Senator Harrison was under arrest. Senator Marks was fleeing Virginia. The Richmond Gazette was preparing a special edition. Federal investigators were opening cases. Thomas Whitmore came to the estate one final time. He found Hartwell in his study, surrounded by empty bottles. "It's over, James. Your political career, your reputation, your fortune, all of it. Done." Hartwell looked up with haunted eyes. They were everywhere. The twins. They could be anywhere. How do you fight that? You don't. You lost. Accept it. Whitmore stood to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, they were brilliant. Those twins. They beat the system using the system's own blindness against it. That's impressive. After Whitmore left, Hartwell sat alone in his study, staring at the evidence pages spread across his desk. Documentation of his own corruption, written in his slave's careful handwriting. He'd built a fortune and a political dynasty on the backs of enslaved people. And two of those people had torn it all down using nothing but intelligence, patience, and perfect coordination. The irony was absolute. In the basement, Isaac regained consciousness. Samuel sat beside him, holding his hand. Did it work? Isaac whispered. It published. This morning. 5 newspapers. They're calling it the Virginia exposure. Hartwell's finished. The senators are finished. Everything we planned, it worked. Isaac smiled weakly. We did it. We did it together. Are we free? Samuel looked at his brother, his twin, his other self, the person he'd been separated from and reunited with and nearly lost. I don't know. But we won. That matters. Isaac squeezed his hand. Don't let me die here. If I'm going to die, get me north first. Let me die free. You're not going to die. Promise me anyway. I promise. 3 days later, on October 31st, Ruth arrived with 4 armed abolitionist allies. They stormed the estate at dawn, overpowered Clemens and Davidson, and extracted both twins before Hartwell could respond. Mrs. Preston opened the doors for them. Mrs. Hartwell looked the other way. By the time Hartwell realized what had happened, Samuel and Isaac were 15 miles away, heading north. Behind them, the Hartwell estate began its collapse. Creditors called in debts. Political allies distanced themselves. The governor who'd planned to be a senator locked himself in his bedroom and descended into paranoia and madness. The twins had destroyed him completely. And they'd done it by being exactly what the system claimed they couldn't be: brilliant, strategic, and willing to risk everything for freedom. Samuel and Isaac reached Philadelphia on November 12, 1856. Isaac's wound had become infected during the journey, and for a week, he burned with fever while Samuel sat by his bedside in a safe house run by Quaker abolitionists. Frederick Douglass visited twice. He shook Samuel's hand and said, "You and your brother have done more damage to the slave power in 6 months than most people accomplish in a lifetime. The Virginia exposure is being read in Congress. People are demanding investigations. You started something that won't stop." Will it matter? Samuel asked. Will anything actually change? Change is already happening. 3 senators forced to resign. Investigations into slave trading networks. Northern anger mobilized. It's not freedom yet, but it's cracks in the foundation. Douglas paused. Your brother, will he survive? The doctor thinks so. But the fever is bad. Then pray. We need him. Both of you. Your testimony is invaluable. Isaac survived. By late November, the fever broke. He was weak and scarred, but alive. The twins were reunited in freedom for the first time since they were 12 years old. They spent the winter in Philadelphia, giving speeches at abolitionist meetings. They testified before informal tribunals documenting slavery's atrocities. They provided detailed accounts of the corruption they'd exposed. Samuel was articulate and precise, describing the system of surveillance and control. Isaac was fierce and emotional, speaking about the violence they'd endured and witnessed. Together, they were compelling. People listened. But they were also apart in ways that hadn't existed before. The separation had changed them. Samuel carried guilt about choosing Isaac for selling, even though it had been Isaac's idea. Isaac carried trauma from being shot, from nearly dying. They'd accomplished their mission, but the cost was visible in how they moved around each other, careful, uncertain, no longer the perfectly synchronized pair they'd been. One night in February 1857, Samuel asked, Do you regret it? Everything we did. Isaac was quiet for a long time. I regret that we couldn't save everyone. That field workers were sold because of our actions. That Mrs. Preston might have been punished. I regret the collateral damage. But the mission itself? No. We prove something. That enslaved people aren't property without agency. That the system can be fought. That intelligence is a weapon more powerful than they want to admit. Isaac looked at his brother. But I also learned something else. Revolution has consequences. Not just for the enemy, but for everyone around you. That's what they don't tell you in the stories. In Virginia, the Hartwell Empire was collapsing. The estate was foreclosed in May 1857. All 87 enslaved people were sold at auction to settle debts. They were scattered across the South, some to Tennessee, some to Georgia, some to Louisiana. The community that had existed on that plantation was destroyed. Mrs. Preston was purchased by a family in North Carolina. She died 2 years later, age 65, and was buried in an unmarked grave. Ephraim escaped during the chaos of the auction. His fate is unknown, though some records suggest a man matching his description appeared in Ohio in 1862. Other field workers, whose names Samuel and Isaac never learned, disappeared into the vast machinery of slavery. Their stories were lost. Governor James Hartwell never recovered from the exposure. He'd been confined to his bedroom for weeks after the twins escaped, convinced that slaves were everywhere, watching him, judging him. He'd rave about the ones who could be in 2 places and the demons with my servant's face. Mrs. Hartwell had him evaluated by 3 doctors. All agreed. Severe paranoid delusion brought on by stress and alcohol. He was moved to a small house in rural Virginia, supported by distant relatives who preferred to pretend he'd never existed. He died in 1862, age 58. The obituary mentioned only a prolonged illness and unfortunate decline in later years. Nothing about the Senate campaign, the political career, or the scandal. The Hartwell name was systematically erased from Virginia society. Buildings were renamed. Committee positions were reassigned. Within 5 years, no one publicly claimed connection to the family. Mrs. Hartwell and her children moved north and adopted her maiden name. A political dynasty that had spanned 3 generations ended because 2 enslaved men documented the truth. The broader impact of the Virginia exposure was complex. Senators Clayton, Harrison, and Marks were all forced from office. Clayton died of a heart attack in 1859. Harrison fled to England to avoid prosecution. Marks was arrested on separate fraud charges and died in prison in 1861. The illegal slave trading network was disrupted but not destroyed. Federal investigations led to 3 arrests, but dozens of participants escaped accountability. The system was too large, too entrenched, to dismantle completely. Northern abolitionist movements gained momentum. Frederick Douglass cited the twins in multiple speeches, arguing that their intelligence and strategic thinking proved the fundamental equality of all people. The Virginia exposure became required reading in abolitionist circles. But in the South, the reaction was repression. New laws restricted literacy among enslaved people. Movement between plantations was more tightly controlled. Punishments for suspected organizing became more severe. The twins' success had demonstrated the danger of intelligent, coordinated resistance. Slaveholders responded by tightening control. Samuel spent months wrestling with this unintended consequence. In trying to expose the system, had they made conditions worse for others? You can't control how power responds to resistance, Ruth told him. You can only resist and accept that consequences are complicated. But doing nothing, accepting oppression without fighting back, that has consequences too. Usually worse ones. Samuel and Isaac never returned to Virginia. They settled in Massachusetts, where they lived and worked as free men. Samuel became a writer and lecturer, documenting slavery through testimonies of escaped slaves. He wrote 3 books between 1860 and 1870, all of which were widely read in abolitionist circles but largely ignored by mainstream publishers. He married in 1863 and had 2 children. Isaac had more difficulty adjusting to freedom. The trauma of being shot, combined with years of field labor, had damaged his body. He worked various jobs but struggled with pain and fever that recurred periodically. When the Civil War began, he insisted on joining the Union Army despite Samuel's protests. He fought with a colored regiment, though records are unclear about which one. He survived the war and returned to Massachusetts in 1865. He never married. He lived in a boarding house in Boston and worked as a carpenter until his death in 1881, age 49. Samuel died in 1894, age 62. They were never as close after the mission as they'd been during it. The intensity of their year as one person in 2 bodies couldn't be sustained in the more mundane reality of freedom. But they stayed in contact. They saw each other regularly. And in their private moments, they would reference the year they spent swapping places, gathering evidence, destroying a dynasty. We did something, Isaac said near the end of his life. It wasn't everything, but it was something. It was everything, Samuel corrected. For us, at least. We were supposed to be property. Instead, we chose to fight. That matters. The story of the Virginia twins became legend among formerly enslaved communities. It was told and retold, embellished and mythologized. Some versions claimed the twins were supernatural. Some said there were 3 or 4 of them. Some said they could literally be in 2 places at once through mystical powers. But the core truth was preserved in the stories. 2 brothers had used intelligence and coordination to expose corruption and destroy their oppressors. Clever resistance was possible. The system could be fought. 4 people living under total control. That message was powerful. Frederick Douglass wrote in his autobiography, "The case of the Virginia twins demonstrates what I have always maintained, that enslaved people possess not just the natural rights of human beings, but also the intelligence and capability to fight for those rights through strategic action. They proved that the slave power, for all its violence and control, can be defeated by minds determined to be free." Modern historians have written little about Samuel and Isaac. Official records barely mention them. The Virginia exposure is usually attributed vaguely to abolitionist intelligence gathering. The twins themselves appear in historical documents only as property, listed in estate ledgers, sales records, auction inventories. But their own writings survived. Samuel's books are preserved in archives. Letters between the twins are held in a Massachusetts historical society. These primary sources tell the real story, unembellished by legend. And the story is this: two enslaved men, separated as children, reunited as adults, decided they would rather risk death than accept slavery. They used the system's blindness, the assumption that enslaved people were interchangeable and intellectually inferior, against itself. They became literally identical, swapping places, gathering evidence, and ultimately exposing a network of corruption that reached into the highest levels of government. They succeeded. They also paid a steep price. They were separated again. They lived with trauma. They watched others suffer consequences for their actions. Was it worth it? This is the question that haunts any honest examination of resistance under oppression. The twins destroyed their oppressor. They also contributed to the scattering of 87 people who'd built a community on that plantation. They won their own freedom. They couldn't free everyone else. Samuel struggled with this until he died. In his final book, published in 1889, he wrote, "People ask if I regret what my brother and I did. They want a simple answer. They want me to say it was entirely justified, that the cost was worth the victory. Or they want me to say it was selfish, that we sacrificed others for our own freedom. The truth is more complicated. We were enslaved. Every option available to us involved harm, either to ourselves through submission or to others through resistance. There was no path that didn't hurt someone. We chose the path that hurt our oppressor most. We chose to fight back using the only weapons we had, our minds, our coordination, our willingness to risk everything. And yes, there were consequences. Other people suffered because of our choices. But if we'd chosen differently, if we'd stayed silent, stayed submissive, accepted our enslavement without resistance, others would have suffered too, including us. The cost of doing nothing is also paid in human misery. It's just less visible because it's the expected suffering of an oppressive system. I don't ask forgiveness for what we did. I ask for understanding. We were human beings fighting for our humanity in a system designed to deny it. We fought imperfectly, with imperfect results. But we fought. And that, I believe, is what mattered most. The final question is not whether the twins were heroes or whether their actions were justified. The final question is this: what would you have done? If you were born enslaved, if you discovered evidence of corruption that could destroy your oppressor, if fighting back meant risking not just your own life but the lives of others, what choice would you make? And more uncomfortable, what gives any of us, looking back from positions of relative freedom and safety, the right to judge that choice? The twins of Virginia proved that enslaved people weren't helpless victims. They were strategic actors, capable of extraordinary resistance. They also proved that resistance under oppression is never clean, never simple, never without cost. History likes tidy narratives. Heroes and villains. Clear victories. Simple lessons. The truth is messier. Samuel and Isaac were brilliant and flawed. They succeeded and they failed. They freed themselves but couldn't free everyone. They exposed corruption but also triggered repression. They were right and they were reckless and they were human. That's the legacy worth remembering. Not a mythical story of twins with supernatural powers, but a real story of two men who decided that submission was worse than resistance, and acted on that decision with everything they had. They changed history. Not enough to end slavery, that required a civil war, but enough to expose cracks in the foundation. Enough to inspire others. Enough to prove that the system could be fought. Enough to matter. Governor James Hartwell died in obscurity, paranoid and broken, his political dynasty destroyed by the people he'd treated as property. Samuel and Isaac lived into old age, free but scarred, never fully recovering from their year as one person in two bodies. The system they fought outlasted them. But the proof that it could be fought, that intelligence, coordination, and courage could wound even the most powerful oppressor, that legacy survived. And perhaps that's the only victory any resistance movement can ever claim. Not immediate freedom, not perfect justice, but proof that fighting back is possible, and that such fighting changes the calculation for everyone who comes after. The twins of Virginia swapped lives and destroyed a dynasty. They also prove something more fundamental, that human beings, even in chains, retain the capacity to think, plan, coordinate, and strike back against injustice. That capacity is the one thing no system of oppression can fully suppress. And that makes it the most dangerous weapon of all.